The shell company KPB belongs to Prairie Band LLC, owned by the Potawatomi Nation. There are white Hispanics and black Hispanics. Native Americans marry outside their ethnic group more than any other ethnic group in the US. Exceptions are made for tribal contracting, putting a bullseye on the rest. It's quid pro quo.
Wake up, wake up, wake up, wake up, wake up, wake up out of your sleep,
Breaking news, the Prairie Band of the Potawatomi Nation is secretly designing so-called mega detention centers for ICE, who plans to use the facilities for detaining undocumented immigrants. This story was initially reported by local Kansas TV station KSNT News, but I have independently verified their reporting along with additional unreported facts. To further clarify the salient details, I'll provide my coverage of the story first, then we'll talk about why it matters for black people. Back on November 7th, early in the month, NBC News reported that the Trump administration was looking at mega warehouses like the ones Amazon uses so they could retrofit them as detention centers for immigrants. At the time, they were exploring options in the South near major airports that they already commonly use for mass deportation. NBC said their sources were two officials, one from the White House, one from Homeland Security. Mind you, ICE, or Immigration, Customs and Enforcement, is a bureau of Homeland. At the end of that same month, November 28th, ICE awarded a $29.9 million contract to a company named KPB Services LLC. That dollar figure actually represents one of the biggest ICE contracts in existence. It's an unusually large figure. But what's even more unusual is that it went to KPB Services in the first place. Why? First of all, KPB is only 7 months old. It incorporated in April 2025 and then immediately beat all the well-established contractors ICE would typically choose from after requests for proposals or RFPs. The company's so young that it has no website, no contracting history, and no proof of concept for architectural designs or experience, not for large-scale construction or even just for single-family homes. There's literally nothing. Second of all, KPB classifies itself on paper as physician offices, suggesting it's a private practice in healthcare. How can a healthcare practice be designing buildings, let alone the kind of infrastructure that only a handful of commercial real estate firms in the country can competently design? And third of all, KPB's address in Holton, Kansas happens to be the same address as an economic development corporation called Prairie Band LLC, which belongs to the Potawatomi Nation. Apply the Ichiti Indian principle of discernment. 1 is an incident, 2 is a coincidence, 3 is a pattern. We've demonstrated a pattern in which KPB consistently looks like a shell corporation, so we can surmise that not only is that KSNT News report true about the Potawatomi Nation contracting for ICE, but also that they want to hide the fact that they're doing it. Federal contracts have rigorously competitive bidding wars because every contractor's dream is to land a massive federal contract. It's illegal to subvert that bidding process with favoritism of any kind, but sometimes exceptions are made for tribal contracting. Investigators looking at this would have to consider the possibility that the bidding process was manipulated to give the contract to the least qualified candidate. Hypothetically, how would the federal government benefit from that? By surreptitiously contracting another sovereign government to do the work, they can stop journalists like myself from being able to use the Freedom of Information Act to access information about the project once it starts, because FOIA only works on matters of public record under the US government, which doesn't include the Potawatomi government. In that scenario, this shell corporation can subcontract Trump's family and friends in commercial real estate to divvy up the work and get paid for it out of his $30 million without the press ever finding out that it was BlackRock or Jared Kushner's company, for example. Jared Kushner being Trump's son-in-law and first-term senior advisor. It's a way to make sure a bunch of hand-picked people get paid, with the Potawatomi Nation taking an unofficial tax off the top for facilitating it discreetly. Let me preface my analysis by addressing all carded Native Americans directly. Listen, Unehiya is an advocacy group lobbying to make Black indigeneity a matter of public record, and I handle public relations for Unehiya. We acknowledge your identity as Native Americans, regardless of whether you acknowledge who we are or not. But our position is that some of your ancestors looked like us, and the majority of your ancestors are Europeans. Similarly, some of our ancestors are from Africa, whereas the majority of our ancestors are American Aborigines. Those Aborigines are our shared ancestry with you. Unehiya greatly respects all Native Americans and their sovereign nations, and the Potawatomi are no exception. So if you're waiting on this video to be an attack against you, and the other shoe isn't going to drop. That's not what this is. Moving on. In general, 2022 polling data from the Chicago Council on Global Affairs shows most Native Americans are in favor of legal immigration. However, it's worth noting that that's the case for every American ethnic group. Yet Native Americans have the largest populace of any ethnic group to support the decrease of legal immigration at 37%, followed by white Americans at 32%. Last year's polling data from the American Communities Project also shows 57% of Native Americans support mass deportation of undocumented immigrants, which means the bigger half of the native demographic wants to kick these people out. Here's the thing. You can't fault the Abo community for wanting undocumented immigrants to get off their land, but you can fault them for hypocrisy because they're supporting one white man to kick out another, while generally welcoming only the immigrants whom the first white man handpicks. Native Americans are basically the Latinos of the North, yet they let their own conquistador, who took everything from their ancestors, handpick friends to come enjoy the spoils of war here. I say handpick because President's Alliance reported that Africans saw the highest visa denial rate of any continent worldwide in 2022, peaking at 54% of their visas getting denied. That contrasts starkly from the 8% visa denial rate for Europeans seeking entry to the US. In fact, West Africa specifically saw 71% of US visa applications denied. That's the region most of us are supposedly from, by the way. Africans and Europeans are both attempting to immigrate legally, but it only works for Europeans. The US can easily be argued to be hand-picking its immigrants. Native Americans empathize with white America to allow a certain type of immigrant into the US. However, while white America is united on that, they're divided on whether or not to include Latinx immigrants. That same report from President's Alliance shows that South American visa applications for the US only see 7% denial, neck and neck with and even slightly better than the European visa denial rate. However, a lot of Latinx migrants do come illegally, and half of white America wants to kick them out while the other half wants to treat them as refugees and shelter them. White liberals think they're fighting racism by defending undocumented migrants, but in reality, they're just empathizing with the colonizer of the South, which is easy for them to do because most of the Latinos coming here are actually just Spanish-speaking white people anyway. The problem exists because there are white Hispanics and black Hispanics, and the white Hispanics are the conquistadors who believe they belong in El Norte with the rest of white high society. Native Americans are the Hispanics of the North, and they're siding with the conquistador of the North because the alternative would be to support the deportation of all white Americans, which is unrealistic. So they let our conquistador bring his friends. Guys, what we're about to talk about is a game changer. In short, Unehiya is a small team of highly capable individuals trying to lobby Congress for federal recognition of black Americans as pre-Columbian American Indians. I'm one of them. I'm the public information officer, so I'm out front recruiting and providing information. I'm also handling PR because of my background in print journalism. Right now, we're focused on a well-planned lobbying campaign to get the Negro recognized as the American Indian, and our campaign strategy hinges on exploiting a quasi-legal precedent in an amendment proposal for a dormant Senate resolution that already exists. I want to appeal to everyone watching this video to support the campaign by joining Unehiya. And guess what? You don't even have to know a single thing about politics or history. Just help us build our list of demands and help each other use Unehiya's genealogy tools to identify your ancestral tribes. Vote yes or no on the hundreds of decisions we have to make. Participate in our tribal town hall meetings after every new moon. Look, I'm not asking for super chats or any other donations to my own pocket. If you've got any spare change, use it to become a stakeholder in Unehiya, which can be done for as little as $7. You can opt into stakeholder leadership for about $20 if you've got the budget for it, which gives you greater voting power on the decisions we make as a tribe. Believe it or not, it only takes 5 minutes to help us reclassify ourselves as Indians. Let's go! When I say Native Americans are the Hispanics of the North, I don't just mean that based on their phenotypic similarities. I'm basing it on their history. The Potawatomi, whose leadership is now facilitating the mass deportation of peoples who are no less indigenous than most Native Americans, share a similar history to Latinx communities, but instead of being conquered by the Spanish or Portuguese, they were conquered by the French, just a different white man. They even have their own French native equivalent to mestizaje. Their word is Métis. Native Americans and Latinx peoples are both products of miscegenation, which is the genocidal process whereby the colonizer erases the aboriginal identity through intermarriage and the privileging of Indian families, whose mix is majority comprised of colonizer blood. Let's review what we found from the Minnesota Historical Society in a previous presentation. This is about Anishinaabe, which includes Potawatomi. Quote, voyageurs, travelers in French, were men hired to work for the fur trade companies to transport trade goods throughout the vast territory to rendezvous posts. At the rendezvous points, these goods were exchanged for furs, which were then sent to larger cities for shipment to the East Coast. Many traders and voyageurs married Native American women and were integrated into their native kinship networks, frequently trading exclusively within their particular community. The French and native people lived together in an often egalitarian fashion, ate the same foods, dressed similarly, and suffered the same hardships. As a result of generations of intermarriage, cultural differences began to blur as mixed children entered the fur trade. End quote. These mixed children also married white people and have continued to do so well into the present day. I've also shown you from multiple studies, including a Pew Research study, that Native Americans marry outside their ethnic group more than any other ethnic group in the US by far. They've been seen doing so since colonization. That's why they look Hispanic. Hispanics have been doing the same thing for roughly the same amount of time. The shell company KPB belongs to Prairie Band LLC, owned by the Potawatomi Nation. Why is it called Prairie Band? What's the origin of the name of the actual Prairie Band of the Potawatomi? The prairie land for which they're known is the same land parceled out in the Prairie du Chien treaties of 1825, 1829, and 1833. If you've seen my presentation on the history of reservations, you should recognize those treaties as laying the foundation for the half-breed tracts established in the 1830 treaty. They were called half-breed tracts because these were tracts of land to which mixed Indians got forcibly relocated by the treaty in question. Reading from the Prairie du Chien Treaty of 1830, quote, "The Sioux bands in council have earnestly solicited that they might have permission to bestow upon the half-breeds of their nation the tract of land within the following limits." End quote. For those who want a more thorough breakdown of that treaty and half-breed tracts in general, I'll put my presentation on the history of Indian reservations at the end screen. But the point is that these people have been mixing out for generations upon generations. What makes miscegenation such a dangerous weapon is that those who are mixed between the tribe and the colonizer are divided against themselves. They will give their life to one side and their ambition to the other. Hence the White Earth tragedy. Ever heard of the White Earth tragedy? It's a historical event, but also the name of a book about that event. Let's read an excerpt from a book review that synopsizes the history covered in the book so we can get a succinct explanation on what happened to the Anishinaabe. Quote, "Marital ties were often used to cement alliances even before contact with Euro-Americans. Intermarriage was used to seal trading partnerships with European fur traders, leading to the development of a unique Métis society throughout the region. This bicultural class mediated between the natives and Euro-Americans. After the fur trade collapsed, the Anishinaabe moved to the White Earth Reservation. Individuals of mixed descent then used their ties to the Anishinaabe bands to secure rights to live on the White Earth Reservation. The concentration of Anishinaabe bands at White Earth led to two distinct communities. The White Earth ecosystem allowed for the culturally conservative full-bloods to practice the seasonal round of hunting, harvesting, and gardening in the eastern portion of the reservation, while the mediating and entrepreneurial Métis and successful farmers were attracted to the central and western part. These ethnic groups seldom interacted. Even though they're really the same people, right? It's just one side is mixed. The two communities peacefully shared the White Earth Reservation until Congress passed allotment legislation and targeted the Anishinaabe for removal of the protective trust relationship. Economic interests won out over Anishinaabe rights as lumber companies and land speculators used Métis agents, mixed Indian agents, to gain access to the allotted resources at White Earth. This led to conflict between conservative Anishinaabe and the Métis. End quote. This is the legacy of the last man standing. For most First Nations, the last man standing is the biracial Indian. And because he keeps marrying white people generation after generation, the indigenous blood in him is heavily diluted today. He's mostly European now, which isn't to deny his legitimate Indian blood, but it does explain the phenotypic differences between himself and his pre-Columbian ancestors. The biracial Indian erased and eclipsed the Aborigine in each of these tribes by assuming the leadership roles of the tribes, but then repeatedly allying with his father, the white man. The same happened with my people in Creek society. What color were those ancestors, though? A renowned Lakota columnist for the Lakota Times just passed away earlier this year, Vince Two Eagles. Rest in power. In 2021, he wrote about the term red man from a Lakota perspective, which differs greatly from the Cherokee perspective and others, by the way. Regardless, he said, quote, the truth is that red man did not come from frequent use until the late 1700s. Further, it wasn't until the early 1800s that red became a universally accepted color label for American Indians. Before this time, the descriptions given of the color of Indians varied in color from deep, rich brown to what technically would be considered a white complexion. End quote. Now, the reason he qualifies the term white here by saying technically is because he knew the history well enough to know that white back then didn't mean what it means now. Even the average complexion of Europeans back then wasn't as pale as it is now. He's saying some Anishinaabe were as light-skinned as modern Sicilian Italians. Think Ray Romano white, not Tilda Swinton white. Plus, the time period he's talking about is the mid to late 1600s, when French miscegenation was already beginning. French contact with Anishinaabe society dates back to 1615 with Samuel de Champlain. And at that time, he's saying the other end of the spectrum for the same ethnic group was deep, rich, brown. Where are the deep, rich, brown Lakota or Potawatomi today? There are very few of them left, and the reason why is because Anishinaabe tribes all have a history of mixed Indians choosing their own best interest over that of those of greater tribal pedigree. Plus, the tribes claim that today's deep, rich brown Sioux or Chippewa are just mixed with African. Why is that necessary if Kyrie Irving represents what Vince Two Eagles just described as the baseline for the color spectrum of his own tribe, of which Kyrie is a card-carrying member, by the way. Point is, Potawatomi today are actually Métis, French Indians who mixed centuries ago and spent the last 200 years mixing more with the English, Irish, Germans, Poles, Italians, and others who have been immigrating here since the 1800s. That's a perfect parallel to Mestizzo history. They're the Hispanics of the North, yet they consistently side with conservative whites on who should and should not get to be here. Why? Because those same conservative whites chose the Métis as the Indian who gets to stay here, while putting a bullseye on the rest. It's quid pro quo.
I just came from the Eloy Detention Center in Arizona. It's one of the major detention centers in our state where people whom the Trump administration has detained are being kept.
Congresswoman Yasamin Ansari of Arizona made an unannounced oversight visit to an ICE detention center.
I wanted to go because I think oversight is one of the most important parts of my job as a member of Congress, and we have heard rampant reports about the conditions inside, so I felt it was very important to go and see it firsthand.
With the Trump administration's focus on detaining and deporting immigrants it doesn't want in the U.S. or who are here illegally, some Democrats are visiting the detention centers where they're being held.
It seemed the vast majority of people I spoke to, they were there for a range of 3 months to 5 months, so all during the Trump administration. These women were pleading with me to let people know about the devastating conditions that they are facing in these detention centers, everything from lack of access to water to racist, derogatory commentary being the norm.
This visit comes after the arrest of Congresswoman LaMonica McIver, who now faces federal charges after an encounter outside of a New Jersey detention center 3 weeks ago.
I think even more so after what's happened with LaMonica and these outrageous charges against her, I think it's important for more members of Congress to take up the opportunity that we're afforded by the law to go conduct oversight at these detention centers across the United States.
Members of Congress do have a legal right to conduct oversight of federal immigration facilities, but Ansari also wants to send a message to this administration as it cracks down on who can be here legally.
I want the Trump administration to know that it is extremely important that these facilities are conducting the highest possible standards when it comes to treating human beings with dignity, with respect. We are watching as members of Congress to make sure that they do so.
We do have breaking news tonight. Prairie Band Potawatomi Nation's Tribal Council is terminating senior members of a subsidiary's leadership team.
And the news comes one day after 27 News first broke the story of a multi-million-dollar contract with the government to design mega detention centers for ICE. Now, the Department of Homeland Security awarded nearly $30 million to the tribe's economic arm. NBC News previously reported the Trump administration wanted to repurpose old warehouses into detention centers as part of Trump's plan to stop illegal immigration.
And in a statement tonight, the Prairie Band Potawatomi Nation says the contract really doesn't align with the values that guide its decision-making process. The tribe continued saying, quote, "We recognize the weight of this news carries for so many, as well as the feelings of anger, confusion, and disappointment that it's caused. We hear those concerns, and 27 News will continue to follow this story. We will also bring you updates on air and online."